Lord of Mysteries. My Identities Echoes Across Time. Chapter 151 to 160. Klein could almost foresee that there was definitely a grand scheme or plan behind all of this. A seer who prophesied his existence 1,000 years ago and arranged all this for 1,000 years, Klein would not think this was merely for some twisted amusement. Especially after the fellow angel made such a promise to him, Klein increasingly wanted to know what kind of script was behind this, rather than passively following someone else's script. In other words, no independently minded person would like to proceed unknowingly along someone else's plan, even if that plan was harmless to them. But the information Klein knew was ultimately too little, and the one who truly held the whole picture obviously didn't intend to tell him the truth in this regard. Besides investigating on his own, if he wanted to know what Lynn's previous plans were, he probably could only hope that Lynn would regain his memory. Klein exhaled and couldn't help but recall the prophecy of the Angel of Secrets. The next full moon night, what will happen then? Klein didn't know, but he was sure that since the fellow angel had deliberately mentioned this time point, it certainly wouldn't be a simple reunion. Otherwise, if it was just to meet again, Lynn could write a letter to the other party right now and arrange a meeting. After establishing a stable cooperation with Miss Justice, Lynn had exchanged contact information with them. So Klein was certain that something would definitely happen then. But it might not necessarily be a bad thing. After all, the fellow angel also obviously hoped that Lynn could provide that apprentice lady with clues related to Abraham. As Klein pondered, he heard the sound of footsteps and looked up to see the Angel of Secrets coming down with Sharon and Marich. Well then, let's talk about the Rose School of Thought and the existence they believe in. As the divine avatar, Lynn said with a smile. For Sharon and Marich, today might be the most tumultuous day they've ever had. First, they discovered Klein's special attention to them. Then, when they confronted Klein, unexpectedly, before they could actually start fighting, an angel suddenly appeared. Not only did they quell the conflict, but also brought the news that teacher Reinette hadn't perished. Moreover, the angel seemed to have a deep grudge against the Rose School of Thought. I have a general understanding of your situation. The divine avatar said this while pouring himself a cup of black tea, taking a light sip, and continued. I've mentioned before that I have some grievances with the existence believed in by the Rose School of Thought. I won't go into details, but based on my grudge with them, I don't mind giving that some trouble. He raised his eyes, looked at Sharon and Marich, and smiled. So, if you can contact Reinette Tinacare, you can pass a message from me. If she wants to deal with those degenerates of the Rose School of Thought, I am very willing to cooperate and assist her in this regard. If I contact my teacher, I will truthfully convey your words to her. After hearing Lynn's words, Sharon responded in a slightly reserved tone. Marich, on the other hand, sat quietly on the side, behaving as a background figure, clearly unable to contribute much to this conversation. Then I look forward to receiving a reply from Reinette Tinacare soon. The divine avatar smiled. His smile, compared to a formulaic one, seemed to carry a bit more genuine anticipation. He continued, as a token of sincerity in cooperating with your teacher Reinette, I can help you resolve the troubles you are currently facing. However, the divine avatar suddenly changed his tone, smiling, and said, it's limited to the demigod who is chasing you. As for those beyonders below the demigod level, I think it's better for you to solve them yourselves. After all, little ones like you still need more practice. The divine avatar said this in a tone like that of a kind elder. His gaze then glanced past Sharon and Marich, landing on Klein, and said, if you find it difficult, you can also seek help from others, such as this Mr. Sherlock before you, who is an excellent beyander. Ads by PubFuture. Upon hearing this, Sharon and Marich exchanged glances and both looked at Klein. Naturally, Lynn's main body also turned to look at Klein slightly later. In response, Klein's mouth twitched, but he was not surprised at all. Although the fellow angel repeatedly claimed that his encounter with Sharon and Marich was just a coincidence, Klein knew that since the angel appeared because of this matter and brought Sharon and Marich to Lynn, the probability of him not getting involved in this matter was practically zero. Fortunately, Klein was used to it. And he didn't reject the idea of participating in the fight against the Rose School of Thought's Indulgence faction with Sharon and Marich. After all, as an active Nighthawk, he couldn't turn a blind eye to the dangerous Beyonders of the Indulgence faction. Moreover, Klein looked at the Angel of Secrets across from him, who was sipping tea. After considering for a few seconds, he asked, "I don't mind assisting Miss Sharon and Mr. Marich in dealing with the Rose School of Thought members hunting them, but can you tell me why you want me to participate in this fight?" Hearing this question, the Divine Avatar didn't rush to answer. Instead, he took another sip of tea unhurriedly, and then said, "The reason is simple. First, as I just said, young people always need more practice." He put down the cup, looked at Klein, and smiled. "Second, I am just helping you get familiar with the subordinate organization of your future #1 enemy in advance." No mistake, although the bitch tree is not the strongest outer deity, she is definitely the one who contacts Mr. Fool the most and is the most covetous of Mr. Fool's body. Klein was stunned for a moment, then quickly reacted, looking at the Angel of Secrets in front of him. Another prophecy. "You can think so." The Angel of Secrets smiled, not denying it. Klein frowned. He had some understanding of the Rose School of Thought, so he knew that they seemed to believe in an evil god called the Chained God. Klein didn't know much about this evil god, only that it seemed to be a very wicked being. Under his leadership, the Indulgence faction of the Rose School of Thought had done many bloody things. But he didn't know more details. End of chapter. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. So, my fellow angel means that I will eventually become enemies with the Chained God. Well, that doesn't seem strange. Klein thought for a moment about his own style and then about the attributes of the Chained God. He felt that such a development was not surprising at all. Just as he would unhesitatingly sabotage the true creator's various schemes, Klein was sure he would stop the Chained God from performing any bloody ritual in front of him. Naturally, this would lead to enmity. But does the term, #1 enemy, mean that I will frequently have dealings with the Chained God and the Rose School of Thought in the future? Klein speculated instinctively. At this moment, he did not know that the Chained God had already become the puppet and Smurf account of the Mother Tree of Desire, which Lynn referred to as the Bitch Tree. Therefore, he did not understand who Lynn was referring to as his #1 enemy. Of course, in a certain sense, Klein's understanding wasn't wrong either. After all, the Chained God, as the Smurf account of the Bitch Tree, also pointed to the Bitch Tree. Lynn was naturally aware that Klein had not truly grasped the identity of his enemy, but he did not plan to explain it. After all, the existence of the Bitch Tree was too unsettling for a normal person. It was better to wait until Mr. Fool had experienced more storms and developed a strong enough heart before revealing it to him at the right time. As long as the Bitch Tree was described as a powerful evil god without mentioning that it was an outer deity, it would not cause corruption. Otherwise, in the original work, Klein would have been corrupted long ago. When he learned the name of the Bitch Tree, he was only a sequence 6. If that's the case, I'm willing to assist Miss Sharon and Mr. Marich in dealing with the Rose School of Thought's pursuers, Klein said solemnly after digesting the information Lynn had casually revealed. However, if possible, I hope to set the action time to next week. I will be more confident then. Klein wanted to wait a few more days because he planned to be promoted to Sequence 7 Magician first. Although he was well equipped, with the creeping hunger for support and control, and the Devil Revolver for direct combat, Klein was still only a Sequence 8. His spirituality was not abundant enough, and using 2 Sequence 5 and Sequence 6 level Beyonder items at the same time was somewhat strenuous. So Klein wanted to wait a bit longer. After all, he would submit his application report tomorrow. If the church approved it quickly, the promotion would only take a few days. No problem, as long as it's within this month, Sharon agreed without any objections. In their original plan, they hadn't intended to act immediately either. Xmas. Originally, Sharon and Marich planned to find a way to lure away the demigod pursuing them and then deal with the remaining pursuers, creating the illusion that they had fled backland to avoid the chase. Although this was somewhat of a stopgap measure, it was the best result Sharon and Marich could achieve. However, even if they managed to lure away the demigod of the Rose School of Thought. Dealing with the remaining pursuers was not an easy task for Sharon and Marich. This was because the pursuers had a mystical item called the Crimson Moon Crown, which could create a full moon effect within a certain range. For Beyonders of the mutant pathway, the full moon would place them under a constant curse, amplifying their inner malice and making them more prone to losing control. While the full moon was a beneficial buff for members of the Indulgence faction of the Rose School of Thought, making them crazier and stronger, it was a detrimental debuff for members of the Temperance faction, who constantly restrained their inner malice and madness. As long as they were within the influence range of the Crimson Moon Crown, Sharon and Marich would fall into a weakened state and lose combat ability if they did not abandon their rationality and restraint. To them, abandoning rationality and succumbing to their malice and madness was worse than death. This was why Sharon and Marich needed someone to assist them in combat. Rejecting Sherlock and seeking someone else's assistance. Sharon and Marich glanced at the smiling angel drinking tea beside them and quickly looked away before he noticed. From the beginning, Sharon and Marich knew they had no right to refuse in this negotiation. Sherlock might have the option to decide whether to participate, as he seemed to be familiar with the young angel, but Sharon and Marich knew they had no choice. Two mid-sequence Beyonders had no right to refuse an angel's arrangement, especially a benign one. Ads by PubFuture. Sharon and Marich misunderstood Lynn. If they had a strong objection, Lynn wouldn't force them to follow the script. After all, Sharon and Marich were not bad people. Lynn would not hesitate to deal with villains, but he would show some respect to generally good people. Wait, what about me? What do I do? Lynn's main body raised his hand as if discovering a flaw in the plan. Am I supposed to assist them against the Rose School of Thought's pursuers? Do as you wish, his divine avatar said leisurely, taking a sip of tea. If you feel idle, you can boost them with some buffs, but don't interfere excessively. It's not conducive to the child's growth. Sharon and Marich were puzzled, but Klein's expression became subtle, recalling Lynn's money-spending tactic in previous battles. Though it was a wealthy tactic, it undeniably changed the course of battles. Are you playing some weird nurturing game? Lynn's main body said with a disdainful expression. The old actor then snorted and looked at Sharon, Marich, and Klein. No excessive interference, right? Fine, just watch how I play the best support. Despite his words, Lynn did not plan to repeat his previous money-spending tactic. The same move would become tiresome over time, and he had to give Mr. Fool some proper combat opportunities. In previous battles, Lynn intervened because the disparity was too great. But this time, Klein would be promoted to magician and had the creeping hunger and devil revolver. In theory, he could even take on a sequence 5 alone, so there was no need for another money-spending tactic. However, giving some buffs during the battle would not affect Mr. Fool's training. With this in mind, Lynn solemnly patted Klein's shoulder. Don't worry, I have plenty of buff scrolls. Just focus on your output. Even if something unexpected happens, as long as you're alive, I can heal you back up. Klein couldn't help but laugh, but he did have some expectations for Lynn's support abilities. His unreliable companion was indeed proficient in crafting supportive scrolls. In this regard, he was a professional. The Angel of Secrets left. Just as he had suddenly appeared, he didn't leave any means to contact him, only saying, "When you are ready to act, I will naturally appear." With that, he casually opened a spatial door and departed from 16 Minsk Street. After he left, Sharon and Marich naturally chose to bid farewell as well. However, these two members of the Temperance faction left contact methods and addresses for Klein and Lynn. They were very polite, asking what kind of compensation Klein and Lynn wanted before leaving, clearly indicating they didn't intend to have them help for nothing. This wasn't surprising. After all, Sharon and Marich were not the type to take advantage of others and expect them to work for free. Especially since Klein and Lynn seemed to have a close relationship with a certain Angel of Secrets, Sharon and Marich would naturally choose to maintain a good relationship with them. Appropriate compensation would be prepared. As for the certain Angel of Secrets, Sharon would try to write to her teacher about his help and suggestions. If her teacher was still alive, all future decisions would naturally be up to him, whether it was cooperation or the compensation for the help provided. Sharon knew that this was the result the Angel of Secrets desired. After Sharon and Marich left, only Klein and Lynn were left in the living room on the first floor of 16 Minsk Street. At this moment, Klein seemed to finally stop suppressing his emotions, showing a complicated expression. Obviously, although the angel had left, his impact still lingered deeply. At least Klein felt that he might not be able to sleep tonight. Sigh. Just then, Klein suddenly heard a sigh. He turned his head and saw that his partner, Lynn, was showing a similar expression, clearly feeling just as complicated. Of course, what Klein didn't know was that Lynn's complex emotions were not entirely the same. His complexity stemmed from the immense joy he felt from playing with cats, which had nothing to do with Klein's turmoil. Not only that, but even at this moment, Lynn couldn't help but continue his act of playing with cats. Lynn sighed deeply, looking at Klein with a complex and wistful expression, speaking in a voice just loud enough for Klein to hear. "Sherlock, do you know that ever since I met you, in just a month, I feel like my whole life has been reshaped. My past 10 or 20 years of life experiences don't compare to the richness of these past few days." "Are you toxic, Klein?" Klein's mouth twitched, his complex and wistful feelings dissipating a lot. He glanced at Lynn, saying irritably, "This isn't my fault. Blame the Angel of Secrets, I'm a victim too, just like you." "True, thinking about it, we're both quite unfortunate." Lynn nodded in agreement, then looked at Klein with a sudden interest, saying, "So, your real name is Klein, right? What's your full name, if I may know?" Yes, the Angel of Secrets was not only unashamed of his cat-playing behavior but also decided to strike first. Klein was taken aback, almost instinctively feeling guilty, even though he knew Lynn had already figured out that Sherlock was a pseudonym. Ahem, Klein lightly coughed, slightly turning his head to avoid Lynn's sharp gaze, saying, "My full name is Klein Moretti, but it's better if you keep calling me Sherlock. For some personal reasons, I can only use the identity of Sherlock Moriarty for now." At this point, Klein naturally wouldn't continue hiding his real name. However, he thought it was best not to reveal his identity as a Nighthawk to Lynn. Klein thought silently, even though Lynn seemed friendly towards the Evernight Church, revealing his identity as a Nighthawk would indirectly expose that he approached Lynn for a mission. Although they both knew their meeting was a result of the Angel's guidance, Klein still wanted to hide this truth that could cause a rift. Otherwise, he was sure that while Lynn probably wouldn't mind, with his petty nature, he would definitely retaliate later. "Klein Moretti, got it." Lynn nodded in satisfaction, then looked at Klein thoughtfully. Under Klein's increasingly nervous gaze, Lynn smirked, saying, "Don't worry, I'm not interested in probing into your past. Compared to your secrets, I'm more curious about the other world you mentioned. What kind of world is it? Mind telling me? Maybe your descriptions will help me recall some old memories." This was naturally a lie, as Lynn hadn't lost his memory. Even if he had, it wasn't about this topic. Lynn brought this up to further strengthen his connection with Mr. Fool and reinforce his identity as an old acquaintance, and because he was genuinely curious. What was the pre-epic of the Mysteries world like? Lynn wanted to know, and learn more about the pre-epic from Klein would help him when creating future personas. Hearing this, Klein's gaze softened, memories of his old hometown flickering in his eyes. Several seconds later, Klein snapped out of his reverie, nodded at Lynn, and asked, "No problem. What would you like to know first?" Pre-epic, huh, I wonder when I'll be able to create a Smurf account in that era." While Klein recounted stories of the past, Lynn's secondary personas, which had been idle to avoid CPU overload during his act, came online. The persona who had been sleeping in the ship's cabin suddenly opened his eyes and lazily stretched. Lynn glanced at the window. Through the small opening, he could see the sky lighting and the faint silhouettes of buildings in the distance. Finally arrived. Standing up, Lynn heard a knock on the door. Mr. Door's meticulous voice came from outside. "Libert, the ship is about to dock. Have you rested well?" End of chapter. All right. Lynn swiftly opened the door, and sure enough, standing outside was Mr. Door. He had clearly changed his clothes in advance and looked more serious than during their earlier journey. Lynn scrutinized him from head to toe and noticed that the number of gems he wore was greater than usual. Clearly, Bethel was preparing to meet the Blood Emperor. Even though he had planned to attack the Blood Emperor later and wasn't truly loyal, nor did he offer faith like other nobles of the Tudor Empire, as a serious and earnest person, it didn't stop Mr. Dorr from maintaining basic etiquette when meeting an emperor. According to protocol, when we arrive at the dock, an emissary will directly lead us to the palace to meet Tudor, Bethel said, looking at the casually dressed, seemingly just awakened young former deity before him, and continued, "You should be invited to join, so, be prepared." Saying the last word, Bethel felt a bit complicated. After all, he was well aware of Lynn's preparations as an accomplice. If we suddenly attack when meeting Tudor and manage to catch him off guard, how high do you think our chances of success are? Lynn asked directly, holding his chin, unconcerned about Mr. Dorr's veiled statements. The preparation Mr. Dorr referred to was naturally the reconnaissance and planning necessary for ambushing a Sequence 0. Familiarizing with the target and making detailed plans were essential. I personally do not recommend acting today. Tudor is a true Sequence 0. Even in a poor state, it's difficult for just Amon and me to achieve your goal. It's best to wait for Antigonus to join. Besides, your current state isn't great either. Bethel sincerely suggested, pausing before adding, Amon and I will convince Antigonus as quickly as possible. Given his personality, it shouldn't take long. That makes sense. Let's wait a bit longer then. Lynn nodded, abandoning the idea of acting today. He then looked around curiously and asked, "Where's Amon?" That troublemaker loved to probe him at every opportunity. Why was he absent today? Bethel, who had just relaxed, wore a subtle expression upon hearing this. This made Lynn raise an eyebrow and speculate, did he forcefully unseal himself? Amon indeed unsealed himself ahead of time while you were resting. Bethel confirmed Lynn's guess, a trace of sympathy flashing in his eyes. He's resting now. The sympathy was genuine. Amon's screams during the unsealing were pitiful, eliciting tears from witnesses and sorrow from listeners. However, despite the sympathy, Bethel was quite pleased with the outcome. That brat, Amon, deserved this punishment. Lynn's first reaction was regret. He missed Amon's painful screams. If he had known, he wouldn't have gone idle. But teasing the cat was also fun, and unlike Amon's screams, which could be heard multiple times, the joy of teasing the cat was unique. Thinking this, Lynn felt less regretful but still a bit disappointed. After all, he missed out on bullying young Amon. What earthly suffering! Lynn sighed but quickly regained his spirits, eagerly turning to Mr. Dorr. Since that's the case, let's visit Amon and discuss the plan for ambushing Tudor. Ads by PubFuture. Are you sure you're visiting and not continuing the harassment? Bethel mentally complained but maintained a straight face, nodding without objection. They then went to Amon's cabin. Knock, knock, knock. Amon, if you can unseal yourself, you can open the door. Lynn pounded on the door loudly, almost breaking it down, shouting, "Don't worry, I won't mock your weakened state. After all, I've seen you in all kinds of conditions. I've even heard your operatic screams." His tone was so earnest that one might mistake their relationship for a close one if ignoring the content. Creeeak. The door opened, and a well-dressed, noble-like Amon appeared. Amon looked much the same as usual, except for the more formal attire and a slightly pale complexion, hinting at his recent ordeal. TCH. Lynn clicked his tongue in disappointment, making no effort to hide his expression. It seems you've rested well. Bethel took the lead in the conversation. Libert and I want to discuss the details of the upcoming action with you. Mr. Dorr maintained his dignified demeanor, unable to speak as bluntly as Lynn about the ambush. One of my avatars has arranged a meeting with Antigonus, without detailing the specifics, just setting a future meeting time, Amon said, adjusting his monocle and looking at Lynn with a smile. Libert is also interested in that stupid wolf. Why not visit together? Days had passed since Lynn proposed the ambush. Though Amon's main body stayed on the ship, his avatars were busy arranging the meeting with Antigonus and gathering information about Lynn, feeding the data back to the main body. Amon's avatars discovered some dubious information about Lynn's second alias and his fictitious background, which Amon did not believe at all. If Libert Abraham were just an ordinary Sequence 2, Amon would give up his claim to the heir's uniqueness and the seer pathway. To Amon, the only reliable part of the information was the timeline of Libert Abraham's appearance in the Abraham family, with everything before that being false. End of chapter. Although there was little information about the person who appeared after the Abraham family, one point still caught Amon's attention. Bethel seemed to have brought Libert Abraham back after a journey through the cosmos and only announced his identity after Libert woke up. Others might not have noticed this detail, as the members of the Abraham family unanimously believed that Lord Bethel had merely gone somewhere else during his journey through the cosmos and brought back the young master. But Amon, who had experienced Lynn's horror in this life, could not overlook the significance of cosmos, which also aligned with his own hypothesis. The only thing that puzzled Amon was Bethel's attitude. Bethel didn't seem to be corrupted, yet he showed an unusually permissive and even compliant attitude towards Libert. This didn't match Amon's understanding of Mr. Dorr, as Amon knew very well that Bethel Abraham was different from him. Bethel was someone who would be willing to sacrifice his life to protect this world. Would such a Bethel really bring an outer god into this world and be so compliant with him? Amon glanced surreptitiously at the helpless expression on Mr. Dorr's face opposite him and then turned his gaze to Lynn. Lynn was clearly very interested in Antigonus, nodding repeatedly upon hearing his words. "All right, to be honest, I have met Mr. Antigonus before," Lynn said with a smile. "The meeting time was right after we met tutors," Amon said with a smile, lowering his eyes. "Unless the other party wasn't an outer god as he originally suspected." But if not an outer god, then what? A possibility vaguely emerged in Amon's mind, but it seemed unrealistic. At this point in time, could someone really successfully ascend to the above the sequence without anyone noticing and not become a vessel for the awakening of the original creator's will? Amon found this perplexing. He, Mr. Dorr, and that foolish wolf Antigonus could coexist peacefully without fighting for the position of the fool because, in this era, ascending almost certainly meant the previous Lord of Mysteries' will would awaken within oneself and become a vessel for his resurrection. Amon had already tested this on Antigonus, otherwise, why would he and Adam be so kind as to help that foolish wolf contain the uniqueness of the fool and become half-fool? Antigonus containing the uniqueness of the fool and the nearly overwhelming will of the fool that awakened within him proved the dangers of ascending to the fool in this era. Based on Amon and Adam's speculation, the best time to ascend to the fool would undoubtedly be before the barrier disappears and the apocalypse arrives. Even ascending to any above the sequence, though not as dangerous as the fool, would still be perilous. Upon ascending, one would either become a vessel for the original creator's will or, due to the revival of the will of the original creator within them, fall into madness. This was why Amon was hesitant to draw a conclusion. Unlike Mr. Dorr, who had witnessed Lynn brutally beating the mother tree of desire and accepted the fact that Lynn was an old one before considering how he ascended, Amon hadn't yet seen Lynn's true strength. "Luckily, I have plenty of time to slowly explore what exactly you are," Amon thought, adjusting his crystal monocle. "If you're really that curious about what I am, why not just ask me directly?" Suddenly, Lynn spoke as if sensing what Amon was thinking. "Can you really tell me what you are?" Amon was unsurprised. He had long noticed Libert's keen insight into people's thoughts and hadn't bothered to hide his own thoughts on the matter. After all, both of them were well aware of each other's intentions. Amon wanted to find out what exactly Lynn was from the beginning. Ads by PubFuture. And Lynn wanted to persecute Amon, just as persistently. These two troublemakers had maintained a high level of dedication in their attitudes towards each other, never forgetting their initial intentions. Guess. In response to Amon's question, Lynn mischievously replied with a single word, his tone extremely provoking. "You really are suited to being a hunter," Amon remarked as if sighing. Although he wasn't surprised by the answer, hearing it still made him feel a bit annoyed. Hee. Lynn laughed rather sarcastically, his thoughts beginning to wander. Lynn could certainly guess what Amon was thinking. He himself had some doubts too. It wasn't about what he was. After seeing his true form in a dream, Lynn had stopped worrying about that. His current doubt was this: according to the rules, the higher the sequence in this world, the closer one would be to the original creator. The closer to the original creator, the more likely they would become a vessel for the creator's awakening. So, The crucial question was, could the creator awaken within him? Lynn was genuinely curious about this, and he had already realized something. Typically, at Sequence 2, one would start to combat the initial awakening of the original creator's will within themselves, but Lynn felt nothing of the sort. He had been combating divinity all along, but divinity and the creator's will were different things. Although Lynn could sense the influence of divinity, he couldn't find even a trace of the original creator's will within himself. Thinking about it, it does seem normal. After all, my true form is evidently quite high in rank. In such a case, even if I were to draw closer, it would be towards my true form, not the original creator. Lynn mused inwardly, though he didn't get overly optimistic. But this doesn't mean the original creator won't awaken within me. It's possible that my current level isn't high enough, so any initial creator's will within me is directly cleared by my true form. Perhaps when I ascend to higher levels, I might still face influences from this aspect. Yes, I can't afford to be careless. Otherwise, if I end up serving as a vessel for the original creator without being assimilated by my true form, I would die with regrets. Lynn reminded himself inwardly, and at that moment, he felt the ship beneath him touch something. After a slight sway, the ship stopped. They had arrived at the port, returning to the Tudor Empire. End of chapter. As Mr. Dorr had predicted, the envoy was sent to escort them to the Tudor Empire's royal palace was already waiting at the dock. After Lynn and the others disembarked, the envoy first formally represented the Tudor royal family, expressing congratulations on the delegation's safe return, acknowledging the hard work of their mission, and offering commendations. He then mentioned that the palace had prepared a banquet to celebrate the successful return of the delegation, inviting everyone to attend. Finally, after these formalities were completed, the envoy pulled out a smaller piece of parchment from his pocket and respectfully addressed Lynn, Bethel, and Amon. Duke Amon, Duke Bethel, and Your Highness Libert, His Majesty has also prepared a tea party and invites the three of you to attend. A tea party? Lynn raised an eyebrow, curiously asking, is it just the four of us in? His Majesty Tudor. Besides Your Highnesses, Lord Antigonus is also invited, the envoy, who had clearly done his homework and knew Lynn's public identity, respectfully replied. Oh, it seems His Majesty Tudor is quite leisurely. Lynn stroked his chin, pondering something as his smile grew brighter. He glanced at the other two and smiled. You didn't mention this to me before. A small tea party, what a perfect opportunity to act. What a perfect setting to make a move. Bethel's brow twitched, and he quickly apologized in a low voice. Sorry, it slipped my mind. Actually, it wasn't that he forgot, but as the conscience of the three cautious families, Mr. Dorr found it hard to let Tudor's beloved tea party become a scene of psychological trauma, so he hadn't mentioned it. Yes, even though Bethel wanted to beat up his superior, his principles were clearly a bit higher than the other two in this regard. No problem, telling me now isn't too late. Lynn didn't mind Mr. Dorr's omission and smiled. Amon adjusted his crystal monocle and smilingly explained, His Majesty Tudor has never liked overly lively banquets. Generally, for any important matter, he would hold such small tea parties. If you want to attend, there will be plenty of opportunities. That's not very hunter-like. Lynn stroked his chin, unable to resist a sarcastic comment. Even though he's already a red priest, he still leans towards the Black Emperor. Perhaps he just doesn't want to change his long-standing habits. Bethel found this quite normal. Alistair Tudor had always favored the Black Emperor over the Red Priest, especially his unchanged asymmetric aesthetic. With this thought, Mr. Dorr suddenly remembered something and scrutinized Lynn for a few moments, then his expression became subtle. Lynn's attire was very traditional, perfectly symmetrical clothing. This type of clothing was uncommon in the Tudor Empire, given that their emperor favored asymmetric clothing. This meant that in the Tudor Empire, people's attire, headwear, and even homes reflected an asymmetric, irregular, chaoticness. Do you want to change your clothes before meeting Tudor? Bethel asked delicately after a few seconds of hesitation. Lynn was stunned for a moment, looking down at his outfit purchased in the Balam Empire, and then glanced at the attire of those around him. He suddenly realized. Oh, I almost forgot, Alistair Tudor seems to like asymmetric clothing. If I don't change, will he hit me? Realizing the situation didn't make Lynn any more inclined to change his clothes, and he asked with a smile. Usually, no, but he might gift you a set of clothes that matches his aesthetic on the spot. Bethel spoke with the tone of someone recalling unpleasant memories. If you don't change, it could be troublesome later. Then I won't change, Lynn said cheerfully. I prefer symmetrical clothing. Bethel wasn't surprised. After all, Lynn planned to ambush Tudor, so accommodating his aesthetic was unlikely. Their conversation wasn't particularly quiet, but the envoy acted as if he hadn't heard a thing, bowing his head even lower. The envoy wasn't disloyal to Tudor. However, as someone close to Sequence Zero, Bethel held an extraordinary status in the Tudor Empire. Thus, when it came to Mr. Dorr and his son, comments about His Majesty that weren't too respectful but also not too outrageous, the envoy would pretend not to hear. Didn't you say we were going to a tea party? Let's go, I'm quite eager to meet His Majesty Tudor. Lynn then looked at the envoy, whose head was almost buried in his chest, and spoke cheerfully. Ads by PubFuture. It would be a shame to miss this chance. Your Highness Libert is jesting. Given your status, you will be invited by His Majesty many times in the future. The envoy, relieved that they had stopped saying anything too disrespectful, finally raised his head and respectfully answered. Let's hope so. Lynn blinked, saying meaningfully. Bethel couldn't help but lower his gaze at these words. He knew exactly what Lynn meant. After this tea party, the next might be when they make their move. Amon still smiled, showing a clear difference from Mr. Dorr's conscience. The envoy, unaware that the three loyal King of Angels of the Tudor Empire were becoming its greatest threats, led the group toward the palace. Soon, they arrived at their destination, and Lynn and the others naturally separated from the rest of the delegation, being led by the envoy to a small garden. This garden was meticulously maintained, with a variety of flowers in full bloom, even those not typically in season, showcasing a stunning splendor. The only thing Lynn wanted to comment on was that the flowers had been meticulously pruned, with no two flowers appearing symmetrical. Even the petals were mostly in odd numbers, exemplifying an asymmetric chaoticness. In the center of the garden, a pavilion also reflecting irregular charm contained a round table and high-backed chairs, one of which was already occupied. The man seated there looked young, though his long hair was half white. His dark eyes held a deep sense of age, and his facial features, though decent, were marred by patches of coarse black stubble, creating a paradoxical impression of both youth and age, sanity and madness. The man sat quietly, holding a thin booklet in his hands. So familiar. Lynn blinked, immediately recognizing the man's identity, Antigonus. Antigonus also noticed their arrival and looked up, his gaze first landing on Mr. Dorr, which seemed to trigger a reaction, causing him to tighten his grip on the booklet. Then he looked at Lynn beside Mr. Dorr. Antigonus appeared surprised and hesitant. Oh, so you remember me. Lynn raised an eyebrow and waved cheerfully, saying, long time no see, little wolf. End of chapter. Antigonus, nicknamed the Half-Fool and also known as Little Antigo, was an ancient angel from the Second Epic, the youngest son of the Annihilation demonic wolf who ruled in the era of ancient gods, and the king of angels on the seer pathway. He was the founder of the kingdom, nation of the Evernight, and one of the earliest significant characters in the original novel, known for his cunning. Back when Lynn first started reading Lordofthemysteries, he once speculated about this half-fool, considering him the primary antagonist and a major obstacle Klein would encounter on his path to ascension. As the plot progressed and the layers of mystery around Antigonus were peeled back, Lynn came to realize that Antigonus was actually a lucky, albeit foolish, wolf. Speaking of Antigonus's luck, one must recount his life experiences. Born a Sequence 2 miracle invoker, he was protected by the Annihilation demonic wolf, living carefree through his weakest period. Later, he survived the Evernight goddess's purge of the demonic wolf family, stumbled upon the Sequence 1 characteristics and uniqueness of the seer pathway, and even became a test subject for Amon and Adam in the fourth epic, successfully integrating the fool's uniqueness. Although Antigonus later lost control and went mad due to the awakening of the fool's consciousness within him after the fall of the nation of the Evernight, his luck persisted. Despite his madness, he was only sealed in the foggy town by the Evernight goddess rather than being killed. Moreover, by the end of Lordofthemysteries Book 1, Due to Klein's ritual to ascend as the Fool, Antigonus lost his Sequence 1 characteristics and the Fool's uniqueness but managed to regain his self-awareness, escaping his madness. This level of luck was unparalleled among the major characters in Lordofthemysteries, rivaled only by the god of steam and machinery. With this preconceived filter and having encountered him briefly in the second epic, Lynn naturally felt no awe towards this half-fool. Thus, he greeted him cheerfully. "Long time no see, little wolf." Although strictly speaking, Lynn held no awe for any major character, considering none could defeat him. Antigonus nearly jumped out of his seat in response to Lynn's enthusiastic greeting. He stared intently at Lynn, seemingly confirming something, and said, "It's you." "Yes, it's me," Lynn replied with a smile, looking at Antigonus. "Last time, you ran off so quickly I didn't get a chance to greet you. I didn't expect you to remember me." Antigonus's gaze flickered. As he looked at the young angel before him, memories and information gathered over time surfaced in his mind. Of course, he remembered the person before him. Though the other party had only appeared briefly during that unforgettable night when the demonic wolves fell, the subsequent knowledge he acquired, albeit with blurred names, constantly reminded him that someone was altering the past. Until today, Antigonus hadn't known who that person was. But upon seeing the young man before him, the fog in his memories and knowledge instantly cleared. He confirmed that this young man was the one altering the past. To be honest, upon realizing this, Antigonus's first instinct was to run as far away as possible. As the angel closest to becoming the Fool, Antigonus knew that even if he ascended to Sequence 0 Fool, he couldn't truly alter the past. But the young man before him managed it effortlessly, making it seem as simple as eating or drinking. Such a being was beyond Antigonus's comprehension, compelling him to consider retreating to his nation of the Evernight to continue his reclusive life. The outside world was indeed too terrifying. But Antigonus couldn't act on this impulse. The other party clearly knew him and seemed very interested in him. Leaving abruptly might provoke the other party, leading to undesirable consequences. So, Antigonus forced himself to remain calm. He looked at the young man, intending to say something, but paused again. You're that child of Bethel who appeared out of nowhere." Antigonus suddenly realized, speaking almost reflexively. After speaking, he somewhat regretted it. Ads by PubFuture. "Yes, I'm Libert Abraham," Lynn replied with a smile, adding, "Of course, you might know me by another name and identity, but I'm not using that identity for now, so keep it a secret, okay?" Lynn made a shushing gesture, his smile warm and friendly, but it almost made Antigonus's fur stand on end. Danger. Antigonus's canine instincts immediately sensed something amiss. He stiffened slightly, recalling the fragments of information about the boy in his altered memories. In the altered past, Antigonus's fate hadn't changed drastically. However, amidst the memories of hiding with his sister, there were now vague pieces of information about a non-existent angel of secrets. These changes hadn't appeared as sudden memories but subtly embedded themselves within his recollections. Initially, Antigonus hadn't noticed the alterations until he reviewed his memories carefully due to the changes in the past. These subtle insertions were terrifying, almost causing Antigonus to bristle when he realized the truth. So now, facing the young man who silently altered the past and his memories, Antigonus stiffly said, "I don't know anything." Yes, he decided to follow his instincts. Antigonus had never been the type to seek adventure or confront everyone. Having experienced the traumatic purge of the demonic wolf family, Antigonus had engraved caution into his bones. Otherwise, he wouldn't have shared believers with his sister and remained secluded in his nation of the Evernight despite ascending to King of Angel. If he hadn't been cautious enough, Antigonus wouldn't have survived until now. This didn't mean he lacked courage. When necessary, he could be brave and take risks. Otherwise, he wouldn't have managed to integrate the Fool's uniqueness. However, Antigonus's bravery was tempered by caution. Confronted with a being like Lynn, who could manipulate time effortlessly, he deemed it wiser to remain compliant. This wasn't a situation that could be resolved by mere bravery. End of chapter. Moreover, Antigonus's gaze subtly swept over Lynn, Amon, and Mr. Dorr. He noticed the curiosity in Amon's eyes and his wariness towards Lynn, as well as the expression on Mr. Dorr's face that seemed to say, "So, you too have suffered under Lynn. Antigonus wasn't truly foolish, although he might not be as cunning as someone like Amon. As the king of angels on the fool's pathway, he definitely wasn't stupid. Seeing Amon and Mr. Door's expressions, Antigonus immediately realized that something must have happened recently. Among the things he didn't understand, it was clear that Amon had suffered a setback at Lynn's hands. Otherwise, this habitual blasphemer, who usually did whatever he wanted and lacked reverence even for gods, wouldn't show such an attitude towards Lynn. As for Bethel, it was even more telling. As the king of angels closest to Sequence 0, Mr. Door was always the most serious and proud among the three of them. Now facing Lynn with such a mix of helplessness and reverence, it was clear he too had experienced something significant, probably even more so than Amon, indicating he understood Lynn's true nature better. The implications were obvious. Antigonus didn't know exactly what the young man before him was, but considering the altered past, the sudden influx of knowledge, and the attitudes of Amon and Mr. Door, he understood one thing very clearly: this was someone he couldn't afford to provoke. He regretted attending this foolish tutor tea party. Antigonus silently cursed his bad luck. While Antigonus quickly grasped the situation and chose to submit, across from him, Amon and Bethel were also taking note of his conspicuous attitude. Mr. Door didn't find this surprising, as he was well aware of Lynn's strength. If Antigonus had seen Lynn brutally beating the mother tree of desire, his current submissive attitude would be completely understandable. Amon, still smiling, felt a deeper sense of apprehension. Although Antigonus hadn't said much, his reaction and attitude told Amon one thing: in Antigonus's perception, Libert was a terrifying existence. Even though Amon had suspected this, having it confirmed made him feel uneasy. So, what exactly are you? Amon stared at the young man beside him, pondering this question while also considering how to extract more information from Antigonus, who clearly knew more. That's great. As the center of everyone's attention, Lynn remained nonchalant, indifferent to their speculations. He nodded with satisfaction and, raising an eyebrow, looked at the nearly fuming big dog in front of him and asked, "Little Antigo, are you afraid of me?" "Why wouldn't I be afraid of you?" Antigonus's expression stiffened further. After a few seconds, he forced a smile and said, "No, you're overthinking it. Actually, you don't need to be afraid of me. I'm not a bad person. As long as you don't provoke me, I won't be interested in doing anything to you." "Well, probably." Lynn hesitated at the end before nodding. Antigonus. That's not reassuring at all. But what could Antigonus do? He could only smile and accept reality. Lynn, remembering something, brightened up and asked, "Can you still transform into a demonic wolf?" Lynn was quite interested in big dogs. He had already tugged at the head of the Evernight goddess's demonic wolf form, so tugging at little Anne's wouldn't be bad either. "I can still transform into a demonic wolf, why?" Antigonus hesitated but answered honestly. As a demonic wolf, although his mythical creature form was a worms of spirit, he could naturally revert to his original demonic wolf form if he wished. As a member of the Fool's Pathway, Antigonus could transform into any desired form. "Can you transform into a demonic wolf later and let me pet your head?" Lynn requested without hesitation, adding, "I don't mean anything by it, I just personally like fluffy big dogs." The Evernight goddess's demonic wolf form's head was quite prickly. "I wonder if your fur will be softer." Ads by PubFuture. So you've patted the Evernight goddess's head, and she let you. Should I make my fur softer? In that moment, countless thoughts flashed through Antigonus's mind. Finally, he stiffly nodded and forced a smile. "If you wish, it's fine." Despite the forced smile, Antigonus didn't mind having his head patted. His sister used to do it all the time. Antigonus just didn't understand why everyone was so eager to pet heads. "You're a good dog. No, a good wolf," Lynn sincerely said. "By the way, you don't need to address me formally, just call me by my name." "All right, Libert." Antigonus obediently complied. Bethel's expression turned subtle. He had thought the next victim would be Tutor or Will, not Antigonus. And from the information revealed in their conversation, it seemed more had fallen victim to Lynn than he had imagined. For instance, the mysterious Evernight goddess had also had her head patted by Lynn. Bethel instinctively visualized this scene in his mind and concluded that compared to these people, his experiences were trivial. Just being instigated by Lynn to harm others was better than being the one persecuted. Mr. Dorr was once again on the verge of being corrupted. Ah, one more thing. Lynn recalled something, looked at Antigonus, and smiled. I know you're scared, but try to act natural in front of Tutor later. I'm not ready to reveal my true nature yet. Just consider me as Bethel's child for now. All right. Antigonus quickly nodded and couldn't help but glance at Bethel. The latter also looked at him at that moment. After a brief exchange of looks, they both felt sympathy for each other. End of chapter. It was clear from the look in their eyes that they had all encountered Lynn. The situation was more than just an additional child. Bethel clearly felt like he had gained an ancestor. Antigonus couldn't help but silently curse in his heart. However, he also keenly noticed the fact, Lynn didn't want to reveal his special nature in front of Tutor. Why? Antigonus naturally wouldn't think that Lynn was afraid of Tutor. In fact, when his gaze swept over Lynn's attire, which completely clashed with Tutor's aesthetic, and saw Mr. Dorr appearing slightly ethereal, the demon wolf faintly guessed the reason. Was Lynn planning to do something to Tutor? Wait a minute, wasn't Amon looking for me earlier to discuss something? Could it be related to this? As he thought of Amon's invitation, Antigonus couldn't help but glance at the three before him again. After confirming that the Blood Emperor wasn't nearby, he hesitated for a few seconds before asking, Amon, you mentioned earlier that there was something important to discuss with me. Does it have to do with His Majesty Tutor? It indeed concerns His Majesty Tutor. Amon adjusted his monocle and looked at Antigonus, shattering his fantasies with a smile. Libert has some interesting ideas he wants to experiment on His Majesty Tutor. Since they were alone in the small garden without even a single servant, Amon spoke freely. Antigonus was instantly struck by a sense of foreboding. He stiffened and looked at Lynn. As a demon wolf who had embedded caution into his very bones, always imagining the worst-case scenario for 3 minutes when encountering trouble, Antigonus immediately envisioned 108 ways Tutor could meet his end. He then remembered something and looked at Mr. Dorr, asking in a slightly trembling voice, Are you serious? Weren't we supposed to support Tutor together? Why are you suddenly planning to switch sides? Upon hearing this, Bethel frowned slightly. He could tell that Antigonus had misunderstood and was about to explain when Lynn gently tugged at his sleeve. Let me explain. Otherwise, he might not believe it. Lynn said, turning to Antigonus with a smile, Don't overthink it. Although I do have many issues with Tutor, I'm not planning to do anything serious to him. I'm just going to play a harmless prank. Upon hearing this, Antigonus heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't believe there was any reason for Lynn to lie about this. Given Lynn's strength, if he had indeed secured support from Mr. Dorr and Amon, there would be no need to lie to him since his decision wouldn't change the outcome. But, what kind of harmless prank? Curious, Antigonus hesitated for a few seconds before voicing his question. Oh, it's very simple. I plan to ambush His Majesty Tutor and give him a beating. If you don't understand that, just think of it as me planning to thrash him. Lynn explained with a smile, then looked at Antigonus and extended an invitation. Bethel and Amon have already decided to join the action. Originally, we planned to invite you after the tea party, but since we're discussing it now, I'll ask directly, do you want to join us in beating Tutor? The overly straightforward invitation left Antigonus stunned for a moment before he nodded vigorously. Yes. Although beating a sequence 0 sounded alarming, it was much better than the downfall scenario Antigonus had imagined. And besides, it's Tutor we're talking about. Remembering the beatings he had endured at Tutor's hands in the past, Antigonus didn't hesitate for a second in agreeing. Then let's discuss the details of our plan after the tea party. Seeing Antigonus agree so readily, Lynn also smiled with satisfaction. With the important matter settled, Lynn's gaze fell on the nearly deformed booklet in Antigonus' hand. Curious, he asked, Antigonus, I've been meaning to ask, what's that booklet you're holding? Huh. The abrupt change in topic left Antigonus momentarily stunned. He glanced at the booklet in his hand before looking at Lynn and hesitantly explained. It's a story circulated by the Abraham family. It wildly fabricates the relationship between my sister and me. My sister was quite upset after reading it, so I originally came to Bethel for an explanation. Ads by PubFuture. Having depended on each other for so many years, Antigonus naturally had a good relationship with his sister, Mother of the Sky. Even after becoming an King of Angels, this bond hadn't changed. Oh, really? Lynn raised an eyebrow and couldn't help but glance at Mr. Dorr. Bethel, however, remained calm, seemingly used to such things. Facing Antigonus, who was the victim of this slander, he remained as composed as ever. Antigonus, it's just some harmless fun from the children. There's no need to take it too seriously. I will restrain them and make sure they tone it down. His words made it clear that Mr. Dorr was openly favoring his descendants. Harmless fun. You always say that, but when have you ever really restrained your children? Antigonus, apparently familiar with such dismissive responses, frowned and said discontentedly. Bethel, don't think you can bully me. This time, you must have that fabricating descendant of yours come to the nation of Evernight personally to apologize to my sister and me, or this matter won't be settled. His tone was firm, leaving no room for compromise. At this moment, Antigonus finally showed some semblance of the half-fool he was. An apology is fine, but it must be within the Tudor Empire. Bethel raised his eyes and, while taking half a step back appropriately, matched Antigonus' firm tone with his own. I cannot allow an Abraham family member to go to the nation of Evernight. Given the personalities of Antigonus and the Mother of the Sky, if the Abraham family member indeed went to the nation of Evernight, their life might not be in danger, but they would definitely face severe punishment. Bethel knew this all too well. HMPH, then you better make sure that descendant of yours never leaves the Abraham family's territory. Antigonus coldly laughed and replied calmly. I will certainly restrain my descendants, but I also ask that a certain foolish wolf hides its tail well when lurking around. If something does happen, don't blame me. Bethel's tone remained calm, but his words were anything but polite. The two King of Angels, who had just felt sympathy for each other, now showcased the shallow camaraderie of their factions, and the atmosphere in the garden turned tense. End of chapter. Wow. However, this time, the tense atmosphere lasted less than half a minute before someone broke it completely. I don't want to get involved in your feud, but little Antigo, can you let me see that booklet in your hand? Lynn raised his hand, looking very interested. What exactly is in it that makes you so concerned? Of course. Antigonus was momentarily stunned, unable to continue his standoff with Mr. Dorr. He then handed the booklet to Lynn. Lynn took the booklet and quickly flipped through it. To be honest, the content of the booklet wasn't much, barely exceeding 10,000 words, mainly describing a deep and abusive romance with a bone-chilling twist. Yes, it depicted the abusive romance between Antigonus and the Mother of the Sky, filled with tropes like, you love me, but I don't love you, you love me, but you're struggling with ethics, I love you, but you're just using me, and so on. These gut-wrenching plots, condensed into 10,000 words, left Lynn greatly shocked. Had the Abraham family's fan fiction become this melodramatic? The fan fiction that the butler showed him never contained such drama. Lynn closed the booklet and couldn't help but look at Mr. Dorr, asking, Bethel, have you read these fan fictions? Bethel was slightly taken aback, then understood what Lynn meant by fan fiction. He shook his head slightly and said, I never read these works. You're doing the right thing. Such melodramatic stories are not suitable for you, reading them can cause stomach pain. Lynn nodded seriously, then looked at Antigonus. After thinking for a moment, he said, I can understand why your sister would be angry. How about this, if neither side is willing to back down, let me be the mediator. Lynn turned to Mr. Dorr and said, you don't want the Abraham family members to go to the nation of Evernight because you're worried they'll encounter something bad there. How about I accompany the person who wrote the story to the nation of Evernight, how does that sound? Lynn then looked at Antigonus and continued, this way, you can get an apology from the writer. Bethel ensures the safety of the family members, and I am also interested in the nation of Evernight, so I can take a tour. Hearing this, Bethel's frown relaxed. He glanced at Antigonus with some sympathy and said, I have no objections. I suddenly think that apologizing in the Tudor Empire isn't a bad idea. Antigonus quickly followed Mr. Door's words. As Bethel said, it's just a child's thoughtless joke. As long as he apologizes to me in the Tudor Empire, let's leave it at that. His words came out so fast, as if afraid Lynn would go to the door to leave the next second. But wouldn't that be unfair to you? Lynn hesitated, looking at Antigonus. After all, the fan fiction indeed went too far. No, not unfair at all. Antigonus shook his head like a fan. All right, since you decide so, let's do that. Lynn clapped his hands cheerfully, settling the matter. What he said earlier was intentional, aiming to make Antigonus step back. If Antigonus had agreed to his proposal, Lynn wouldn't have minded taking a trip to the nation of Evernight. Of course, Lynn's plan leaned towards Bethel, but wasn't that normal? After all, he had a better relationship with Mr. Door. Lynn smiled and suddenly sensed something, raising his eyebrows. The other three evidently also sensed the approach of a certain Blood Emperor, and the garden fell silent. When Alistair Tudor walked into his beloved little garden, he saw his three most loyal subordinates standing in the garden, seemingly having just had a conversation, and the atmosphere in the garden seemed somewhat subtle. Tudor didn't care at all. After all, the friction between his three kings of angels was not a new thing. If the atmosphere among them were harmonious, Tudor would be surprised. "Why aren't you sitting?" Tudor asked indifferently, then his gaze fell on the only stranger in the garden. It was a boy who looked at most 15 or 16 years old, with golden curls and pale gray eyes, exceptionally handsome. Even by Tudor's standards, this young man had good looks, the only issue being he didn't resemble Bethel much. Tudor didn't intend to delve into whether a certain angel king's child was actually his offspring. As long as the other party claimed so, he accepted it. Ads by PubFuture. Tudor then looked at the boy's clothes and frowned deeply. Collar, symmetrical. Brooch, symmetrical. Buttons, symmetrical. Every part of the boy's outfit seemed to step on Tudor's nerves, who preferred irregular, asymmetrical clothing. Tudor wanted the boy to disappear from his sight immediately. While Tudor scrutinized Lynn, Lynn naturally observed Tudor, the legendary predecessor of impulsive acts described in the original novel. As described in the original work, Alistair Tudor appeared to be only in his 30s, with long hair that faintly glowed with a bloody sheen. Lynn knew the hair was originally brown and turned this color after becoming a red priest. So, Little Red's hair color was indeed influenced by the hunter pathway. Lynn's thoughts briefly drifted, but he quickly refocused. Lynn continued to examine Tudor, noting the chiseled facial features, stern lips, and the high, prominent nose, finally resting on Tudor's eyes, filled with madness and cruelty. Lynn almost subconsciously thought of Medici, his half-brother, whose eyes were blood red and turned iron black when using his powers. Alistair Tudor was likely similar. The atmosphere subtly became tense again. Among the three spectators, Amon adjusted his monocle, showing no expression, evidently ready to watch the show. Bethel seemed a bit nervous, worried that Lynn and Tudor might start fighting. Antigonus belatedly remembered Lynn's significant grudge against Tudor. He glanced at Lynn, then Tudor, regretting coming out today. Thankfully, Antigonus was in human form, otherwise, his fur would have bristled. "You," Tudor finally spoke, unable to bear it any longer. He casually tore off his cloak and threw it to Lynn, saying coldly, "Wear this." He couldn't stand the symmetrical patterns on the boy's clothes any longer. But since the boy was Bethel's child and a Sequence 2 angel, Tudor couldn't treat him like others, making him leave or strip. After thinking, Alistair Tudor decided that out of sight meant out of mind. End of chapter.